Hello, everybody. This is The Font is Mightier Than the Sword. My name is AC. I work with Indie Press Revolution, which is a distributor and network of small press role-playing games and publishers. And yes, over to Sin.
Hi, my name is Sin. You may also know me as Diwata or Diwata Manila. I make games and I do illustrations and layout. All of my games were also done, like all of the layout for all of my games were also done by myself. So yeah, most of these days I've been doing a lot more layout and stuff. So I guess that's why I'm here. Hi.
And hi, I'm momatoes. I'm also an indie RPG designer from the Philippines. And I also do layout for my projects and works, which include art, which finally got released to over 1,000 people around the world, and the Magus and many other RPGs before that. But before and maybe even alongside my RPG making journey, I also moonlight as a communication specialist and was also a graphic designer for some World Bank research publications, some development projects. So it's really interesting seeing graphic design and layout across different applications, not just for games, but even for things like peace process and other topics.
Mentioned I have done layout for I've done layout for Champions International for Hero Games and also Symposium, a game about asking questions for High Rock Press. So I have done layout for stuff, not nearly as much, but I've done some. And you also have to forgive me. I'm currently in a hotel room with my sibling, who walked behind me for a moment there, running the Indie Press Revolution booth at SnafuCon. So multitasking. But yes, thank you both for joining me for this panel. It's gonna start off with just like the most basic question I can think of, which is like, what types of programs do you use for your layout? Yeah.
Do you want to start, Ben?
Right. So when it comes to what kinds of layout software, I have tried a lot. Like when I was starting out, I did genuinely try doing layout in Photoshop, in Illustrator, in Microsoft Word. But for longer form works, especially ones that require publication, I do tend to stick with InDesign, as that's what I was used to for 7 years. The same InDesign CS6. But recently, I've been thinking of moving to Affinity. But I think layout sometimes is a matter of applying grid principles, information design, and also knowing how to use space well. And that means being able to translate that into software like PowerPoint, Google Slides, or Google Docs. So that's why I used PowerPoint for one of my games, the Magus, which was a really lovely piece of work to do. How about you, Zen?
For software, I've also done. I've also used a lot of programs. Almost all of the computers and laptops I've ever used were never quite had like PowerPoint because I couldn't afford the Microsoft Suite. So I turned to Google Slides. So like a lot of my very early works were actually made with Google Slides. For one in particular is Across This Wasteland with You, which is a two-player like GM-less game where you play two queer people in love traversing a hostile desert trying to like find sanctuary. And that was made in collaboration with my wonderful girlfriend Pam, or the Dovetailer. And at the time, she was living in her house, which is like, it's not too far away from me. It's about maybe 40 minutes away. But we worked on it in a separate like kind of area because that was where she lived before she moved in with me. And so we had to kind of figure out a way to like write the game and do the layout collaboratively, and that's how we did it. We also did public utility mechs on it. So I have a lot of experience with Google Sites. And then I entered the small hell that was Photoshop because I don't know why, but for some reason I decided that the way I would do layers on that is literally just like grouping elements into like under one group and then like making it disappear whenever I need to create a new page. It's
Yeah,
terrible. Oh,
that's
God.
exactly what I did. Because I use a very old version of Photoshop
Yeah,
CS2
yeah, me too.
for Symposium, and that's exactly what I did, and it caused
Uh-huh.
so many problems. It
Oh
was
gosh,
awful.
like I keep misplacing elements under like the wrong group and category or whatever. And so that was a wild ride and I don't think I ever want to come back to it. Mostly because I now have affinity. I was one of the lucky ones during a campaign that Pam actually ran to equip a lot of indie RPG designers with affinity. They were given a very like generous discount by Affinity to hand out a lot of keys, and we raised like a good amount of money to afford keys for a lot of people. I no longer remember because 2019 seems like such a long time ago. But ever since I got Affinity, I've just been designing with it, and I don't ever want to look back. I
Yeah.
I would, and also I had to stop using Adobe products because at the time I was borrowing my then works laptop to do that, which maybe was not under my company's like TOS, but it's fine
Fine,
because
fine.
when I still had a day job, I used to design during the lull hours. I worked in advertising as a social media manager and data analyst. So sometimes when there would be lulls in the periods, like between budget allocations and campaign stuff, I would sometimes design my games, and that's what it was. And then when I lost that job because I moved to a different thing, there came the laptop with it. So I had to find another way to design, and it was back to Google stuff for me briefly until Affinity happily happened to me, which is amazing, and I've never looked
Yeah,
back.
I
Yeah. And I
really.
think that, oh, yeah,
I don't know.
sorry.
No,
Oh,
you go. No, you go.
kind of underlines something that I found fascinating was that you could use so many tools to do layout. Like the juggernauts would be the ones that are dedicated to it, like Affinity or InDesign. But we found success and we've been able to apply aesthetics and clarity of content even using free platforms like Google, or if you have PowerPoint, you can also genuinely use that to start doing layout. So I
Mhm.
think maybe for me the more interesting question, maybe instead of asking what's a good layout software, would be what's a bad layout software. And I think we can all definitively say it's Photoshop.
It's definitely Photoshop. I will never look back. I mm, wow.
100%.
I think one of the things I miss about Photoshop is uh it's a lot more accurate when it does the, I forget what you call it, but these days I do it with CSP because I finally managed to afford Clip Studio Paint. But the I forget the magic wand. There you go. The magic wand tool actually I
Mhm.
find on Photoshop is a lot more accurate than Clip Studio Paints. Like it just the feathering is just a lot better. I don't know what it is, but it just is. Like I feel like I don't have to clean up as hard on I remember not cleaning up as hard on Photoshop as I do now with Clip Studio Paint, but I also don't know if that's like me misremembering things. Oh yeah, and that's another thing. I do use Clip Studio Paint for some graphics that I have to put together because sometimes I do put in like composite images. Like I will take um I guess like free assets from different places, and then I'll put it together to make one cohesive image. Because sometimes there's and like free images are good, but they're not quite it's not quite what you need, especially if you're designing a game that's like hyper specific for a certain thing, right? So um I put them all together and I edit them on Clip Studio Paint, which actually works pretty well for it. I know that a lot of people use it more for like digital drawing and like creating comics and manga and stuff like that, but I personally have found like a nice way to use it for like creating composite stuff out of like free assets, free commercial assets, by the way, because that's also an important thing with layout. You have to make sure that your assets are like you that are they're under Creative Commons and like stuff like that.
Like a website that you generally go to maybe first for those types of assets?
I go to Vecteezy. That's like my go-to, honestly. I am under membership there. I figured it was worth it. It's a very low monthly membership because I don't even personally feel it. I just know that it charges it every month, and I don't feel it too hard. So maybe it's not that expensive. I think it's somewhere around the ballpark of like maybe $5 to $10. And then you get to download like a lot of pro graphics, which are honestly a lot better than some of their free stuff. There are some gems in their free, like, available for all stuff. Oh my god, sorry, my cat is like trying to like knock over my glass. But it's most of their really good stuff is under pro. I also go to Pexels, pexels.com and Pixabay for photos instead of like vectors, because there are some nice ones. But you know what I really wish? I really wish there were more accessible photos that are diverse. Like a lot of the Asian models that they use, for example, can look very like it's all mostly East Asian is what I'm trying to say, I guess. And there's not a lot of people that look like me, or like even remotely Southeast Asian. So I guess I wish there were more diversity in terms of that kind of stuff. I have to like sometimes take hours before I find like something that remotely like looks like me. And sometimes I have to edit it and like make it look kind of that it fits. But yeah, what's sad is whenever you look for like Filipinos online and like stock photos, a lot of them are like juxtaposed with like poverty, which is like, I understand that that's really a thing in our country, right? Like I'm not trying to deny it because I also come from poverty. But it's just like, sometimes I just want two Filipina girls like holding hands somewhere. But yeah, that's the kind of stuff that I have to access.
Yeah. It is tricky. Sin did mention a lot of some wonderful places you could get assets. There are a couple more, some more expensive, like Elements and Battle.com, but it's expensive because it includes stock video. Some are, of course, on the cheaper side, and one of the ones that I love that are free and public domains are like Met Museum, or I don't know how to pronounce it. It's a Dutch museum, the Museum, which is where I got most of the images for the magas. Let me just find something that I could actually show you. When it also comes to these things, you can remix it. Sin has mentioned doing composites, for example. So in this image, I hope it shows up. So
like
this
that,
one was a painting that's public domain in the same museum. But of course, you can use your photo editing software to add a new dimension to it. So here it's just as simple as copy pasting, duplicating, or riffing off the existing public domain art. One other thing which I found useful, which is a completely different ballpark, is AI. Artreader.com. So with artreader.com, you can generally use their AI to generate images. A lot of them can look fairly weird, also evocative in an interesting way. So if I hopefully I show this up, this was generated by AI. So it is under their license under Creative Commons Zero. And luckily that means that you could also start building on top of it, putting your text
Mm.
on it,
Yep.
and making sure that it fits your general theme. Sin
Mhm.
also mentioned using stock photos. And I think that is one challenge that you would have to contend with the fact that diversity is difficult. I don't remember the
Yeah.
link at the moment, but there are dedicated stock photo sites for queer models, for
Yeah.
fat models, and also different ethnicities. But one lovely way to use stock photos is to also start using composites on top of them. So this
Mhm.
is a free stock photo from unsplash.com, as well as this one. So basically, just adding scribbles on top of it could already customize it so much more. So there are
Mhm.
definitely free resources out there. And I think some creators have challenge with it because it's all gonna look like medieval old school illustrations, but
Mhm.
even if you just print it out, photocopy it, put your marker on top of it, you can
Mhm.
do creative remixes with what's
Yep.
available out there.
For sure. For sure.
So
I
cool.
think I can show off like a few things with like stock where I didn't have to do a lot of editing with it. Let's see if like we can zoom in a little better. Is it visible? I hope so.
I think so,
So this
yeah.
is oh my god, my cat. This is this is on Affinity, and this is my game Faster and Faster Still, which I released a little earlier this year. So the whole concept of it is that you're dreaming and you're stuck in a tower and you're trying to find your queen counterpart, right? Throughout this entire like layout, everything is stock. Like I barely actually like edited it. I think you can see it. So sometimes it's like a lot of just like cropping and a lot of like changing colors or making little like upping the saturation or like lowering the tone curves. And like I know I sound like really vague at the moment, but um I think with a lot of like practice, this for example is a nice sort of just like simple thing where uh you understand immediately that this whole concept has like a masquerade tied to it, and maybe it's a little eerie. Like I think I upped the saturation and then I removed uh or rather I up the contrast and then I changed the saturation to make it a little bit more, I guess, rusted looking and like a little older looking. Like I weathered it a little with the editing, and then like here because you're starting to talk about like connections to other players, because this is the part about like asking questions. You have like two people kind of like touching hands very gently and etc. And yeah, like it's there's not a lot of like modifications, and like I guarantee you there are going to be like very particular photos out there. You just have to like try really hard to find them. This one in particular was like a very modern looking thing. You know those like flat lays of stuff. But like if you just change it to like fit the vibe of your work, it's not that I wouldn't say it's not that hard. I just think that it takes a lot of practice. So like sometimes it takes hours though of trying to find the right thing. But yeah.
Yeah, I think AC, something you mentioned before the stream started was that how do you begin designing or conceptualizing a game? And I think Sin touches upon some points like knowing the vibe of what you're going for, tying it to the text that will be on the page. So I think for me as a creator, something that really helped me a lot was looking for similar inspiration. Like it could be
Mhm,
newspapers, it could be science textbooks, it could be photo books,
mhm,
it could be lying around in your
mhm,
library or your coffee table, but just going out there and seeing, hey, how did people treat this team before? Maybe how can I incorporate that aesthetic into the same design? Because sometimes it gets
mhm.
really tempting to like start putting in the text already with some photos, some assets.
Yeah.
But then
Mhm,
suddenly halfway through, you realize, the aesthetics doesn't match. So making sure you have that pre-planning, a mood board really works. That inspiration
mhm,
fuels you at the beginning, I think makes for much more sustainable workflow with layout.
mhm.
Yeah, that's something where because I've done a very few layout projects, but I'm starting to do layout on some of my own like games that I've been designing, and I keep feeling I guess the urge to like make a mood board, but I haven't done it yet because I was like, oh, aren't mood boards like kind of cringy now? Like I'd start like putting stuff together. I'm like, I feel like I'm in middle school putting together a Pinterest board again, but it's totally because otherwise I just end up like noodling around in Affinity for hours and not actually getting anything done because I'm unhappy with everything that I end up like uh, somewhat finishing. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's crazy.
Honestly,
Yeah.
I have like my Pinterest is so active. Like I have so many mood boards, I think, that I sometimes get lost in all of my mood boards. I have to like literally search the title of the mood board to find it. But apart from that, also is that I think can also kind of like come hand in hand with art direction, which is something that I've been trying to practice and learn recently because not I don't know a lot of art directors in our industry at the moment. So I'm doing a lot of self teaching, and Navatham is actually becoming like a real exercise in that. And one of the things that I find, like when talking to artists and trying to make sure that like whatever they produce will fit in the layout that you're envisioning for your project, is I also put mood boards together and kind of like in the art order that I give them, because like, I mean, like obviously I know that not a lot of people doing layout are gonna have like control over the art, but if you're an indie person like a lot of us, you will most likely be doing editing and like layout and art direction and everything all on your own, right? Including wrangling your cat whenever he feels it necessary to show himself off. Um, but artists
Cats are an
actually really
important part of the
appreciate,
creative process.
yes, handling your cat. Oh my god, don't drink my water. What is wrong with you? Anyway, I think a lot of it is all like artists actually really appreciate mood boards. Like I personally, like whenever people like commission me, sometimes I ask them, "Hey, do you have a mood board that I can look at so that I know what kind of style you're going for?" And like I know sometimes a lot of clients don't really know what they're going for, but sometimes like building a mood board with your artist or like having a mood board set for your artist is a really good way to at least like preempt, I guess, your layout. Like one of the things that I did, for example, with an artist that I'm working with, um I asked them in advance, hey, I want this look where it's kind of like the edges are very brush like kind of like they melt into the rest of the paper. So they made like feather light kind of like edges for the illustrations that they were doing, because they were doing illustrations for major locations in Navatham, right? So I can show that off later, but now because I planned that with them, it looks like the entire painting is kind of like blending into the paper, and like that's one way I think to help, I guess, like pre-plan your stuff. And actually, one question that I'd like to ask the rest of the panelists here is, like, where do you take your design layout sort of like structure principles from? Like, I personally started with like looking at a lot of magazines, but I'm also super curious to find out what yours are, because I would also like more references.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think
Mhm.
hammers in that regardless of the aesthetic, there will be some good core layout principles. But before we jump into that, I think something that's I really love also about being an RPG player in particular is that there is already so much inspiration out there on itch.io, on Drive Through RPG. So even if you don't feel like making a Pinterest board, if you download the RPGs and support the creators you love making that layout, you can save that
Mhm.
PDF as a really cool inspiration later on. Now, when it
For sure.
comes to
Also rate
like
their game.
also
Yeah.
right again, yes.
Great game.
So
5 stars.
I'm just googling it right now, but one thing that I really like using for graphic design principles is I guess more of the classics. I was self-taught, but I did have access to a lot of the old the graphic design books like grid and layout, like German books that like predated the Bauhaus movement. And while they can feel fairly rigid, it's quite nice to see the history behind that. But one thing that I will share in the chat right now is what the Clayton Notestein did, which is layout and the grid. It is a basically essential primer for layout principles. But what's really nice about this guide is that it's geared towards RPG layout designers. So actually at the end, he will show examples of how the grid has been used in various RPG products, and it will go over some of the core principles on the grid like gutter, columns,
Mhm.
padding, and so
Mhm.
on.
Mhm. Oh gosh, I'm definitely going to like read up on that. And that's another thing actually, like things like gutter, things like padding and stuff like that. Whenever I take commissions, I find it very important to always ask my clients, okay, what are your dimensions? What how much like gutter do you want? Who are you working with to print this? Because like for example, I know a lot of RPG people go to Mixam for their printing, and they actually do have guidelines on their website to like how to do all of the things, and how to prepare your document first before printing. Because there is a difference between people on the RPG scene who ask you to design their layout because they don't really have an intention of printing it, but there are like a lot of them who you know for sure that you're asking, or rather they're asking you to lay out because they're going to be printing it, and usually they will come armed with, here are templates, or I'm working with Mixam, here is the links to the stuff. um but it's also your job, I guess, as the layout artist to like know and understand all of these terms. I Google half the stuff I see. I just Google
Yes,
everything,
yes,
honestly.
yes.
There are a lot of really good tutorials on YouTube. Like, I don't have just one, I guess, channel for my source for like how to figure out all of these dimensions and stuff. Because uh more sources the better, in my opinion. But yeah, please do ask your clients immediately about your dimensions, or else you're gonna end up having to
Yeah.
like repeat all of your layout from scratch. That's super sad. That has happened to me once, honestly, to no fault of the client's own, because the client was me, and like I didn't quite realize that I needed it to be in like a certain. I didn't realize that I needed it to be in a certain size, um, because those were the only sizes that that printer that I went to was offering. So like you also have
Mm.
to like I guess like ask your client, where are you printing, what what stuff do they have available, so that you don't end up like designing something and it turns out that they don't have the service for you,
Yeah.
because that's a bit of a heartbreaker. Yeah. So then you have to
That
do all
was
of the work
definitely
over
as I was,
again.
yeah,
Yeah.
as I started, oh, yeah. As I started doing this stuff, especially with Symposium, which is a deck of cards, I didn't
Mhm,
realize that the place we were getting it printed, uh,
mhm,
totally like the initial design I made was just not going to work with how much like I had a border around the edge of the card. That was the main problem. Don't do
mhm,
border like full borders on the edge of your card because you want to have bleed like because the cutting process can be so imprecise that like
mhm,
the text is probably going to look centered enough, but if you try to have an exact border, that's pretty much never going to work unless you find the best card printer in the world, which is
mhm,
difficult.
Yeah, it is genuinely a balance, especially with print, with what you can get away with and what you can
yeah.
afford. Because absolutely, if you can make it all full print, color page, or edge to edge, fantastic. But not all of us have the budget. And while the concept of like white space, which is making sure that there's lots of space around your text, possibly even around your images or within elements, is important in enhancing readability. As a
Mhm,
indie creator, right? Adding that extra space means you pad out the page numbers. So when you go to the printer, suddenly, oh crap, the estimate just jumped up because when you are printing for bulk or for offset, having extra numbers of pages will be a cascade down the budget line.
mhm,
So really,
mhm,
it's a balancing act. Some
mhm,
of the graphic designs I've seen before have been quite maximalist, like they cram as much page text inside the single page, which
oh, yeah.
reduces the readability. But if you
Mhm,
are gutsy and have the aesthetics to pull it off, can still look nice. But it's hard because accessibility is a real issue with print.
mhm,
Sometimes it's easier to read, but if you are making for digital as well, doing some of the things you never thought you had to think about, like metadata, headers,
mhm,
markdowns,
mhm,
suddenly get much more important. So I think what Sin mentioned, that you have to be sure, are you doing this for print? Are you doing this for digital? Are really great questions to think about first. And one
mhm.
ramification of that, again, I'm going to show it, is the Magos, which I designed in PowerPoint, which meant it is 16 by 9. It is not a standard print size at all. Like, this
Oh
is
my gosh, I
already.
thought that was intentional. What the heck? I thought that was intentional that you went for landscape.
Sick.
It was intentional in the sense that I thought it was going to be digital only. And I was like, hey, why don't I maximize PowerPoint, right? Because it's like gorgeous white landscape. And then somebody asked to print it. So now it doesn't fit in any bookshelf, but it is a nice coffee table book. I will admit that.
That's funny. Oh, that's
So
a vibe
yeah, get
though.
your dimensions squared out first.
For sure. Oh gosh. Oh yeah, and like I think another thing that you mentioned was the readability and like stuff. Programs usually will have these blue lines if you see them. Look at all of these acknowledgments. I feel like I'm advertising. I'm so sorry. But
No.
these blue lines will actually are your best friend, honestly. They are basically your margins, and I really like to stick to these sorts of margins because they tell me, hey, your stuff is like maybe getting a little too close to the edge, or it's a little like this one actually needs to be edited because it's a little close to the edge, but sorry. I think that while you can play around with margins, right? it's always important to try to consider a lot of things like yeah, like what you said, like readability, like how much text you think you can cram into like one page, and why you maybe shouldn't be doing that, and um how would this look if you increase the font size all throughout, and like how many pages is it gonna add. And like honestly, that takes a lot of practice, and sometimes it helps to, like, if you have a page, a thing that I used to do when I had more liberty to, like, go outside and like print my games, because like an upcoming convention is happening, like session zero. What I do sometimes is I would take a page and I would export just like maybe that page or that spread, and especially if I'm unsure about it, like what it'll look like in print, right? Will it be readable or anything like that? I do print it, just though that spread or that page, just to see if it's okay. Obviously, like not everybody can do this, because not everybody has a printer, not everybody has like access to. Sorry, I'm gonna have to take my cat. To like just having like a printer like on hand that you can text, say, here are the documents, can you print it? I'll pick it up tomorrow. But if you do, and if that's something accessible to you, because it really looks different, like when it's printed versus when it's on your web. And there are, like what we were talking about for accessibility will differ if you are designing for web and if you're designing for print. Like one of the things that I took from like BIM, for example, from momatoes, an inspiration that I took from them is actually the colored edges of the page. That is a direct inspiration from you, because like that's also something that I never had to think about. I never thought I had to think about. But what I meant is these things at the edge of the pages. I started to like put in like colored edges of the pages, because then it's easy to search for what you need, and you can just associate a color with a certain part of the uh of the content. And like I thought that was genius. I was just like, I am gonna copy that, thank you, tomatoes, you're the best. And I also think that that's okay, like if you find somebody out there in the wild doing a cool layout thing, like it's okay to unabashedly just be like, hey, that's cool, can I like use that also? Because like nobody can really patent like a layout style or like a layout technique, right? If the most you can do is just say, hey, that's cool, can I use that idea too? Like I guess you can ask permission and stuff like that, but like nobody can really, I guess, like penalize you for for imitating somebody's work. And like you said, inspiration can be found from everywhere, including our friends.
Yeah. I think something you mentioned was like the importance of printing it because it really is
Mm,
different. Like I'll be slightly technical here that your monitor shows the
mm.
pixel in your screen based on a dots per inches
Yep.
figure. So basically that's how compact the pixels will show on your monitor. So depending on how your monitor treats those pixels, some of the fonts that seem fairly okay when you print them out could be too big or
Might
too
not be
small,
good.
or
Mhm.
the visual perception will differ somehow. If you have a printer, you don't have to print it colored first. You can remove all of the background, all the image first. Just make sure that you have the font size and the heights between each line correct.
Yes.
You can just
Yes.
print it at work
Basic.
or in the office if you're sneaky, and then just start adjusting. It could be minute adjustment. You could start, I'll print 10 point first, and then too big, let's try 9 point, and then you can try 9.5 next, and then find a happy medium. Like I think Johan Noor, who was the designer between Morkborg, was really exacting. Like he found that the ideal line height was like 1.29 something, a very exact decimal point, and that was what he did. He printed it several times over and over again. As an indie designer, you don't have to be that exact, of course, but having even just one print can be really meaningful for the text on your page.
It's super eye opening also because like I've made the mistake of like in my first ever experience with session zero, because that was also like literally the first year that I started like layout for my games, right? I realized a lot of things. Like I had no idea how gutter worked back then, and that like printers like immediately assume that you have gutter. So like a lot of my images were not like my colored pages suddenly had like this weird white border, like those things. So you have to anticipate, right? Sometimes if you export it, you will already be able to like pick out little things that you can just edit back almost immediately without having to print it, as long as you view it as like there's a specific view. View as print, I guess, is the most common word, like way to refer to it. If you view as print, sometimes you'll get to see kind of how it's supposed to look, but like printing it's still different because then like um the saturation of the colors also are important. Like one of the things that I'm trying really hard to be conscious about for my design with Navatham, for example, is color blindedness. When I commissioned my artists, I tried to make sure that like everybody was conscious about like color blindedness and like the contrasts of things. And because I am using like little tools in the layout to like make sure that things are accessible, I wanted to like go all the way, even with like that consideration. And the first person that I used to think about when it came to color blindedness was my stepfather, because like he's so bad. He will sometimes, what he used to do is he will sometimes come up to me with a book and point out a color and say, "What color is this?" And I'll tell him not what the color is. And like being somebody who does not have that issue, um, I think I never used to think about it until my stepfather used to come up to me and ask me about it. And now that I'm designing books where one day he could pick it up and be like, "What color is this?" I want to like eliminate that. I want him to experience the color as intended. I guess that's one of the things that I also like concern myself with, I guess.
Yeah, color is important for print and or
Uh,
digital. I believe the most common color blindness is red green color blindness, and there are tools assess whether an image breaks that or makes it hard to see.
I think there are websites online where you can upload an image and see if it's clear or like good for color blindness. I don't have the links right now, but I'm sure if you just Google it, there will be, because I used to I used to use one when I was first like assessing a lot of the art that was coming in for Navatham. And like honestly, artists don't usually have much of an issue if you tell them, "Hey, can you change the colors, color composition in this thing?" Because like sometimes it's not too big of a change, especially if you correct it at an early stage. Please don't correct them when they give it to you as a final. That's really hard and that's really bad. um Correct it when it's in its sketchy stage. If you detect that early that it needs color correction for things like color blindness and whatnot, and contrast and etc., or if it doesn't match the whole aesthetic of your book, please correct it early so that your artists don't hate you. You also have to be kind to your artists when working with them.
Yeah. So AC, you were finally going to start designing more, right? Are there other kinds of layout questions that you feel like new designers should tackle as well?
Mm-hmm.
see. I think one of the other questions I had, well, one of the questions I have is uh, just, hmm, sorry, they all just immediately left my brain as soon as you asked me that
Okay.
question. I'd say, I mean, vis-a-vis like doing freelance stuff. Well,
Mhm.
when it's a game that you're just like uh, being given the like plain text for, I guess
Mhm.
my question would be, how do you like? What's the first thing that you do, like besides reading through the game? Do you ever like, oh, can we like play test this, or how do you catch the vibe of a game so you can start designing a layout for it?
Do you
Right.
want to start?
So
I mean,
okay, it depends, right? But I'm guessing that if you are the freelancer in this scenario, the easiest thing would be to ask the creator about it. Usually,
mhm.
the difficulty is the creator sometimes finds it so hard to say what aesthetic they want. They usually clients will say, "Oh, whatever looks good," and then you look at the document; it's like 100 pages in, and you're not sure
Yeah.
how to start figuring that out. But one thing is, if you are a freelance layout creator, is start pulling some inspiration and then show it to your client. Show them like 2 or 3 visual ideas for the layout and say which one of these do you feel is closer to your game. And then you start blending that with how you read the text, because I think the ideal is you play test it, right, and you get a really solid feel of it. But the freelancer life is a life bereft of time. So as
Mhm.
so the moment you start narrowing your options by giving them choices to pick from and then looking up similar inspirations, I think is a really good starting point if the creator doesn't know what they want.
Okay, good.
Mhm.
Sorry, for a second there, my phone just made the Discord logging off noise. Am I still?
Oh,
Am I
oh
still
gosh.
here?
You're
Still
okay.
alive?
You're okay. You're okay.
Okay,
I think
good.
so.
I was like, oh,
Okay.
that's good. Okay, cool. Well, thank you. Did you have advice on that as well, or?
Well, everything that Momedo said is like super on point. Like honestly, I do the same. I sometimes will ask them, are we going for cyberpunk? Are we going for afropunk? Are we going for solar punk, or is this magical girl? Whatever like sort of aesthetic, are we going for noir? But apart from that, I also like to actually skim the entire document and see if there are particular elements that need consideration, like tables, because we love our random tables in this in the scene.
Yeah.
Um, what else? Character sheets that need to be integrated if they have it pre-designed, or if they're asking you to design it as well. That's a completely different thing. If there are parts like discussing statistics, like stats or something, like your abilities, your or whatever other very particular like gameplay oriented items, I like to take note of them and to make sure that those things are not lost in the text, I guess. And that goes into the page planning in general, because like one of the most common questions I get asked whenever I'm working with people is, how many pages do you think this is gonna be? And like honestly, it also takes a lot of practice to know, because it honestly really depends. And from personal experience, things like tables will take up an entire page or two. So like no matter how small the table is, because you really need to consider the visualization of a table. Do you want this to be simple and that like they don't think about it, or is it like a core part of the design, so you have to stylize it? Uh, so yeah, that's like one of the things. Like I recently had to really like think very hard about this table because it was a D66, and you don't want to just slap the table there and say voila, it is done. um uh you kind of have to like really think about how you're gonna you're gonna make it work. And then there's of course like things like if HP is a thing, if like dexterity or like using dragon game terms, but those things, that part, you have to also take that into consideration. That's one of the things that I start like noting on the like raw text document. Now, okay, these are the things that are in here, and then I give them the estimate. So I when I give my estimates, also I give a very generous 10-page allotment because sometimes sometimes a table apparently needs 3 pages or more, and or sometimes they want like really stylized like spreads. So it really depends. It really honestly depends. And I really like to plan my pages because the way that I charge it's a per page sort of basis. So what I like to do is, hey, if your project will run for about 50 pages, this is how much I'm charging for it. And if your product runs for more than that, the base price is this much, and then we can negotiate depending on how complex you want it to be. If it's complex, then we probably have to hike up the price a little bit. If it's simple, we can stay at the base price, and I won't charge you any higher, because like that's the kind of stuff that I consider in my freelance work. And the reason why I charge per page, like you don't have to do this. Every layout artist has their own like metric and rubric for why they charge the way that they do, and I don't stand to like dictate how you should do it. But the way that I do it is I personally measure, like for myself, 20 pages will feel like it takes me this long, this amount of hours, and this is how much time I would like to invest in it, and therefore I think that this will be worth this much for me. And yeah, that's why page count and page planning is something that is very important for my layout purposes. Of course, this doesn't have to be for everybody, but yeah.
Yeah, I know we only have a little bit of time left. I don't know if there's any questions from the Twitch chat, maybe, or
We had one question that was already kind of touched on, but it was, what software have you tried and hated?
Oh,
okay. Photoshop.
We all hate Photoshop. Yeah.
Like I said, I use a 13-year-old version of Photoshop CS2 for Symposium and for Champions International, and it was really, really awful, especially when attempting to export stuff to be printed. So definitely, I'd recommend anything like Google Docs or Slides or PowerPoint. Like that's all. I think so much easier, especially if you're just gonna have it be digital. But for print stuff, when I say managed to, when I asked my bosses at IPR if I could get the Affinity Suite on, company money for company reasons for sure, and not any other reasons, and they agreed. The first time using Affinity, it's just like so much easier. I mean, it's meant to do that sort of stuff. So it was kind of incredible, eye-opening, I would say. Be like, whoa, it's so easy. You don't have to individually export, 100 pages to PDF and then stitch them all together.
God,
Yeah.
horror stories.
Does depend on like where at the journey you are at, because if you're just trying to learn layout, and if you're trying to learn good like information arrangement, like knowing what to prioritize, Google Docs will already help you a lot. If you're trying to transition to being able to move the text around, to see how the text will interact with the margins around the pages, with the art, I would suggest you use Google Slides or PowerPoint. But if you're gonna go into more into print, especially if it's gonna be bulk printing in any way for say over 50 pages or so, you really should start looking into Affinity or a more dedicated publishing software, because there will be some configurations, some settings, and being able to have more advanced grids will help make sure that when you print, it doesn't look wonky. But it
Mhm.
is an expense, so I would really recommend that master the basics first. Try it out
Mhm.
even in PowerPoint or your favorite cheap layout software, because really the principles are much more important than the software, when especially when you're starting out.
For sure, for sure. Like, you can have any, you can, like, a masterpiece can be made with most anything, really. And like sometimes, I can stare at I can stare at a page for hours and not know what to do, even though I have affinity. And it really depends on what level of skill you're going into it. And I honestly think that layout can be done by anybody, because I too am self-taught, uh, and that you can learn on the go, on the fly, and that there's so many resources out there. You can look up all sorts of tutorials online and like look at magazines and other game books and stuff like that. Anything that you're inspired by, really, just put them all together in a nice little folder in like your laptop or like on your in your Google Doc, whatever, and just figure it out. Because every project, in my opinion, is a learning thing. There's a learning curve to every project, so um yeah, honestly, good luck.
Thank you. That's,
But I started out layout in my high school when I inadvertently became the layout artist for the school newspaper, and I had no idea what I was doing back then. No idea. And like I did not touch layout until like 2019 again since high school. So here I am, I guess. And like honestly, find inspiration from your friends. Like I love Momatoes' work. Honestly, another sort of like group of people that I find super inspiring is the sealed library aesthetic. I really love it. I really love how it looks, and I recently got to work with them for layout also, so I got to learn how their aesthetic works, and that was super cool, honestly. And yeah, you know, I hope you find good stuff with like layout for yourself someday. It's honestly super fun, and I'm liking it way more than I realized I would.
yeah, I mean, it's a totally like, I've always been like it's a great creative pursuit to have in this industry. Like creating games is fantastic, but I've always been more into the visual stuff. So I've been having a great time, as I say, like noodling around in Affinity and such. And I definitely take. I mean, that's why I asked you guys to be on this panel. Is I take so much inspiration from your guys' work. It's just like so like bold and striking and gorgeous. I love especially we've talked about the Magus quite a bit today, but it's the first thing I saw from Momatoes and it just like it blew me away. And then Gun and Slinger is just
I'll take it.
also is incredible. I love that sort of style. So definitely take a lot of inspiration from that stuff and all sorts of stuff on itch, like we've said before. Just go on itch, look at stuff, rate games, buy games. It's
Rate their
amazing.
stuff.
Yeah, rate their stuff, 5 stars.
Okay. I can start. So, hi, my name is Sin. Again, I am a designer and layout artist and illustrator. You can find me on Twitter at Dewata Manila, DIWATAMANILA. And I have my pinned tweet, which has everything. Go right ahead and find it.
And hi, I'm Momeros. I am also Momeros everywhere. So twitter.com/Momeros and Momeros.com. And on November 1, that's on Monday tomorrow, I will have an AMA on Reddit /r/RPG, which is the RPG subreddit. I hope to see you there.
And my name is AC. You can find me at resident_Corvid on Twitter. You can buy Symposium on the Indie First Revolution website, which is also my day job. So again, we sell and distribute indie tabletop role-playing games. Yeah. I think that's it. Thank you guys so much for joining me on this panel. It was lovely talking to you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody.